when my birth parents found me. It was the peak of summer, and I was scavenging near a trash bin. The air buzzed with the sound of flies, and the stench was enough to make anyone gag from 10 meters away. But I was oblivious to it all, my senses numb to the foul reality. My birth mother and her adopted daughter, faces masked, kept their distance. It was my birth father who approached me, softly calling my name. I turned to him, my gaze fixed on the bottle of mineral water in his hand. Extending my scarred hand, I asked him humbly, "Sir, can I have the bottle?" His tears fell like rain, ignoring the rotting stench that clung to me. He pulled me into a tight embrace. I coldly eyed my birth mother and the false heiress from a distance. The show was about to begin. I rode back to the mansion in my father's Maybach. As soon as she stepped out of the car, Tan Wen, my mother's adopted daughter, retched from the smell that clung to me. My mother, her eyes brimming with tears, tenderly patted her back, handing her a napkin and water. My father, observing the scene, frowned in displeasure. I nervously twisted the hem of my clothes, looking at my father with unease. "I'm sorry, Dad." He patted my shoulder, his eyes filled with even more guilt. "It's not your fault, child." My birth mother turned to me, her face a mix of awkwardness and shame. I shook my head gently at her and said sweetly, "It's okay, Mom. I'm used to being disliked." Her eyes quivered, filling with pain and remorse. I hesitated, then asked timidly, "Mom, can I take a bath?" She snapped out of her trance. "Of course, Wooma. Take Miss upstairs to bathe." This was my birth mother. She was the one who lost me when I was 5 years old and mistakenly brought Tan Wen home 2 years later. Yet, facing the battered and dirty me, she recoiled in disgust, unwilling to personally take me for a warm bath. In the bathroom, I submerged myself in the water, washing away the grime and 12 years of pent-up anguish. I was back, but it was clear Tan Wen had no intention of leaving, and my mother wasn't ready to let her go either. Wooma had to change the water 4 or 5 times. When the water in the tub finally ran clear, my mother came in, cautiously asking, Nuan, do you need Mom to help you scrub your back?" "Sure," I replied nonchalantly. After all, I had been stalling for this moment. My mother hadn't expected me to agree so readily. She froze for a moment, then hurriedly fumbled for a bath towel. I stood up from the tub, boldly exposing my body to her. She gasped, dropping the towel as her hand trembled over the centipede-like scar on my waist. Nuan, what happened?" I glanced down briefly, hesitating before softly saying, "Mom, it's no big deal. 1 year, my adoptive mother got sick and couldn't afford treatment, so she had me sell a kidney." "What?" My mother grabbed my shoulders, tears silently streaming down her face, then breaking into loud sobs. Even if she felt no connection to me, I was still flesh of her flesh. Hearing her cries, my father rushed upstairs, his steps heavy. I slipped on my clothes as he supported my nearly fainting mother. "What's wrong? What happened?" I revealed the scar on my waist, tears welling up in my eyes. "Dad, it's my fault. Mom accidentally saw the scar from my kidney operation, and it made her sad." My father's teeth clenched in rage. "Was it your adoptive parents who forced you to do this? Where are they now? They must pay for this." I shook my head. "No need, Dad. They're already in prison, sentenced to life. They probably won't ever come out. A year ago, I reported them, using this kidney and the evidence I had gathered over the years of their trafficking in women and children." Tan Wen, who had been eavesdropping, wavered on her feet. She hid her emotions well, but I could see through her act. She wasn't some poor child mistakenly taken in by my parents due to amnesia. She was the biological daughter of my despicable adoptive parents. When I was 5, due to my mother's negligence, I was kidnapped by them. They intended to sell me, but in desperation, I lied, claiming my family was wealthy and would give them a lot of money if they let me go. I didn't expect that my attempt to save myself would push me deeper into hell. My adoptive mother, noticing I was the same age and had a slight resemblance to her daughter, decided to keep me. She had Tan Wen mimic my behavior, and 2 years later, just before I was supposed to start elementary school, she left Tan Wen on my birth parents' doorstep. Tan Wen, seeing my parents' heart-wrenching grief over me, harbored an endless hatred in her eyes. She walked in, wrapping her arms around my mother's waist from behind. "Mom, don't cry. Now that sister is back, we should focus on making it up to her. We should make it up to her. That is to say, she had no intention of leaving this home. She still saw herself as a rightful member of this family. My mother and Tan Wenwen cried together, as if Tan Wenwen were the one who had lost a kidney. I looked on, my eyes filled with endless sorrow, appearing so desperate for my mother's embrace. Their tight hug made me seem even lonelier and frailer. My father's gaze grew increasingly disappointed as he watched them. After they had cried enough, Wuma had prepared a large table of food. We went downstairs to eat, just as my brother, Tanzi, returned. He glanced at me coldly. I stood up and greeted him, "Brother." He responded with a disinterested Tan Wenwen ran over, grabbing his arm, "Brother, why are you so late? Where's the chocolate I asked for?" Tanzi affectionately ruffled her hair, then pulled out a box of chocolates from his bag and handed it to her. Tan Wenwen gave me a taunting look. I smiled back at her. She suddenly pouted, "Oh no, Nuon. Brother didn't know you were coming back today, so he only bought one box. How about we share?" She happily began to open the box. My mother, watching this harmonious scene, was filled with relief. When, I said calmly, "you keep it for yourself." Then, I turned to my mother and gently reminded her, "Mom, I can't eat chocolate. It triggers my asthma. Did you forget?" My words hit like a bombshell, leaving everyone stunned. My father's eyes welled up with tears again. This is my real daughter, no doubt about it. I smiled at my mother. "You're really careless. Your own daughter can't eat chocolate, but the imposter eats it happily. How did you mistake her for me in the first place?" My mother's lips trembled, her face turning pale. How ironic it is for a mother to forget what her own child is allergic to. After a long silence, my mother forced herself to explain, "I'm sorry, Nuon. 2 years after you disappeared, Wenwen came into our lives, and I thought maybe your asthma had gotten better over time." I looked at her with an aggrieved expression. "But Mom, I have dimples. Wenwen doesn't. Children grow fast, their appearance can change over time. And this, I picked up my chopsticks with my left hand. I'm left-handed. Wenwen uses her right hand. Did you not notice that either? When I learned that my adoptive mother wanted to swap my life with her daughters, I deliberately hid my most distinctive features. So Tan Wenwen never really grasped the essence of being me. I had hoped my family would notice something was off right away. But I never expected that my mother, even knowing something wasn't right, would still accept her. My rapid-fire questioning left my mother drenched in cold sweat. My father watched silently, not offering a word in her defense. It was my handsome brother, Tanzi, who finally spoke up. "Do you really need to be so aggressive, Nuon? Mom was deeply traumatized after you went missing. When Wenwen showed up 2 years later, she thought Wenwen was you. She wasn't in the right state of mind to notice those details." Tears welled up in my eyes as I met his gaze, my voice choking with emotion. "Brother, I'm not trying to push Mom. It's just that for all these years, every minute, every second, I've been thinking of you all. I missed you so much it nearly broke my heart. Coming home and seeing that you mistook someone else for me. Do you know how that feels?" Tanzi pressed his lips together, silent. Tan Wenwen, now sobbing, chimed in, Nuon, don't blame Mom, Dad, and brother. Back then, I had lost my memory and didn't remember who my real parents were. So when Mom mistook me for you, I just happily accepted it. And now, do you remember where your real parents are, sister?" My tears fell onto the table. "You must want to go back to them, right?" She bit her lip, looking pitifully at our parents. "Dad, Mom, I want to stay with you." I clenched my fists, acting as if this response had crushed my last shred of hope. I abruptly stood up and said with a trembling voice, "Mom, Dad, don't blame Wenwen. I'm going upstairs to rest." I walked upstairs, and within minutes of closing my bedroom door, my father's stern voice echoed from below. "What do you mean you don't want to leave?" "Dad, Tan Wenwen's nervous stammering reached my ears." I chuckled coldly, stepping onto the balcony to smoke a cigarette. After a few years of living in darkness, I'd become addicted to nicotine. When I first smoked in front of my father, he was shocked. Nuon, when did you start smoking?" I didn't answer, and he didn't ask again. He only said, "Quit it. Dad will help you." The sobbing sounds downstairs grew louder, but instead of Tan Wen, it was my mother's voice. Wen, the whole reason your father and I have kept you here is because we wanted to give Nuan a surprise. Now that she's back, we can't keep hurting her. The next time you see Nuan, I want you to apologize to her, okay? Tan Wen cried so much she couldn't speak. My mother sighed deeply. After your father and I finish handling the legal issues, you can move out. If you can't stand being alone, we'll send you to study abroad. We won't let you suffer. I finished my cigarette and returned to my bed, staring at the photos on my nightstand. My gaze fell on a small suitcase under the bed. I bent down to pick it up and opened it. The black leather case was packed with evidence of Tan Wenwen's involvement in the child trafficking operation, as well as proof of her fake identity. I had obtained these years ago, but hadn't handed them to the police. After all, my birth parents had loved her for so many years. My revenge wasn't about ruining her, but about taking back what was rightfully mine. It was a battle for the affection that was stolen from me. I was determined to reclaim everything that had been taken, to force my mother and Tan Wen to sever their bond, bit by bit, leaving no room for reconciliation. As for my mother's love, I would decide how much she could give me. When I woke up the next day, I felt unwell. In the afternoon, I had a fever. When Tan Wen brought me my medicine, I deliberately knocked it out of her hand, causing it to spill. She cleaned up the mess without complaint. I hesitated, as if filled with regret. Sister, don't bother, I'll take it later. With a pained expression, I held her hand. Sister, I heard you cried a lot last night. If you're tired of living here, you should go find your real parents. I don't blame you for what happened in the past. She bit her lip, tears welling up. Nuan, do you really want me to leave? I just don't want to see you suffer because of me. But Sister, my kidney was removed without anesthesia, and I felt every cut. I heard the sound of my skin and flesh being torn apart. I was awake when they placed my kidney in a bag filled with ice cubes. It was still warm. Even now, the scar aches whenever it rains. At night, I'm haunted by the nightmares of that surgery. Sister, it was really painful. Tan Wen was trembling. Nuan, don't say any more. I smiled faintly. It's okay, I can bear it. If I could survive that, what else can't I endure? Tan Wenwen's face turned pale, her tears flowing freely. At this moment, I was weak and powerless, yet I exuded an air of tragic grace, as if she was the one who had wronged me. She stood there, dazed. My brother, Tanzi, entered with a thermos. He handed me a bowl of soup, his tone gentler than before. Drink this. I glanced at Tan Wen. She immediately wiped her tears and stepped aside. I tried to take the bowl, but my hand trembled too much. Tanzi frowned, holding it for me. He gently blew on the hot soup and brought it to my lips. Drink slowly. I felt a mix of relief and longing, looking at him with soft eyes. Brother, do you still hate me? His hand froze. He lowered his gaze and said lightly, You're my sister. How could I hate you? But you're so good to Wen, and you treat me like a stranger. Tanzi didn't respond. I weakly rested my head on his shoulder. Brother, if you don't like me, I can leave. I can go back to the trash heap where I came from. You won't be disgusted by me, and Wen can continue being your sister. He stiffened. I buried my face in his neck, suppressing a shiver. Brother, I don't want to be a burden to you. I don't want to make everyone uncomfortable. Enough, Tanzi finally snapped. He put down the bowl, his voice cold. You're just overthinking things. I timidly raised my head. Brother, don't be mad. I didn't mean to upset you. He sighed, a hint of helplessness in his eyes. He wiped the sweat from my forehead and softened his tone. Stop overthinking and focus on getting better. Seeing Tan Wenwen's disappointed look, I smiled inwardly. That night, I had a high fever, shivering under the covers. It was Tanzi who brought me warm towels and gently applied them to my face. I called out for my mother, but she wasn't there. Only my brother stayed by my side, taking care of me. A few days later, I saw Tan Wen walking up to my mother, tears streaming down her face. Mom, Dad, I've decided to move out. I can't stay here any longer. Nuan is the real daughter of this family, and I'm just an outsider. It's better if I leave. Tears welled up in my mother's eyes. She held Tan Wenwen's hands, her voice trembling. Wen, we've wronged you, but Nuon has suffered so much over the years. We can't keep hurting her. Tan Wenwen cried harder, hugging my mother tightly. I leaned against the wall, silently watching them. Afterward, Tan Wenwen packed her bags and moved out. I stood by the window, watching the car drive away. My heart felt empty, yet there was a sense of satisfaction. I had won. I had reclaimed my place in this family. But at what cost? The house was quieter without Tan Wenwen. My mother seemed to have aged overnight, her eyes dull and lifeless. My father was often away on business trips, leaving only Tanzi and me at home. We were like strangers living under the same roof, bound by blood but separated by invisible walls. I had achieved my revenge, but the victory was hollow. My parents' guilt and sorrow weighed heavily on me, and Tan Zhao's cold indifference pierced my heart. I realized that in my quest to reclaim my place, I had lost something far more valuable, the warmth and love that once filled this home. The truth was, I wasn't the same person I was before I was taken. The years of hardship and suffering had changed me, hardening my heart and filling it with darkness. The Nuon who once laughed and played in this house was gone, replaced by a shadow of her former self. I had come home, but it didn't feel like home anymore.